This is the LG Wing, a beautiful, unique looking device that was nothing like we'd ever seen before. At a time when smartphones were starting to feel more and more alike, LG dropped something completely out of left field. A swiveling screen that revealed the second display underneath. It was bold, creative, and absolutely turned heads. Whether you loved it or you thought it was impractical, you couldn't deny the ambition behind it. But there was a twist. Despite all the buzz and innovation, the LG Wing turned out to be one of LG's last phones ever. So how did we get here? How did LG go from being a major player in the smartphone industry, one that constantly pushed the envelope with cutting-edge features, to completely leaving the market in 2021? So today, we're going to be diving into the rise and fall of LG phones. We're going to be exploring how they became pioneers of innovation, and ultimately what led to their exit from the market. And just to clarify, this isn't going to be a comprehensive history of every LG phone made, because honestly, that would take forever. Instead, we're just going to be focusing on key innovations, missteps, and lessons from LG's smartphone journey. It's a pretty interesting topic to look into, so make sure to subscribe, and let's find out why LG was considered one of the most innovative smartphone brands for a period. It was important to know that LG wasn't just a company that played it safe. They were pioneers in pushing boundaries with features that, at the time, felt like they came straight out of a tech enthusiast's dream. And honestly, a lot of those features have become standard in the industry. Take the double tap to wake feature, for example. It's something so simple yet so practical that it's hard to believe that it wasn't always a thing. LG was actually the first to introduce it, and now almost every smartphone has its own version of it. Or how about the ultra-wide camera lens? Before LG came along, most phones only offered a single lens, but LG decided, why not let people capture more in their shots? Now, ultra-wide lenses are a must-have on just about every flagship. And then there's the taller aspect ratio. LG was one of the first brands to ditch the traditional 16:9 aspect ratio for something taller and sleeker. Around then, it felt a little experimental, but now it's the standard. Even the biggest brands such as Apple eventually caught on. But it wasn't just these industry-changing features. LG also wasn't afraid to experiment with things most brands wouldn't even touch. They gave us self-healing phone backs, dual screen attachments, and even the LG Wing as mentioned before. Some of these ideas did stick, but some of them, well, they didn't. The point is that LG was always trying something new, and they weren't afraid to take risks. For every groundbreaking feature LG introduced, there always seemed to be something holding them back, and that something was usually inconsistency. Let's start with their product lineup. LG's naming scheme was honestly just a confusing mess. You had the G series that was using single digits, and the V series that actually jumped by tens. And then out of nowhere, they just stopped. They ditched the G series altogether and pivoted to phones like the LG Velvet, which, while stylish, didn't exactly scream flagship. But the naming confusion was only the tip of the iceberg. LG's phones felt like experiments year after year, and you really didn't know what you were getting into. One year, they give you a modular phone with swappable components like the LG G5, only to abandon the idea entirely in the next generation. They'd release phones like the LG V50 Thin Q, I know, horrible name, with dual screen attachments, but not follow through with software support to make it practical. It was like they had all these amazing ideas, but they just couldn't decide which direction to commit to. And speaking of software, for as innovative as their hardware was, their software always felt like an afterthought. Updates were slow, painfully slow. While Samsung and Google were rolling out Android updates relatively quickly, LG users were left waiting months, sometimes even longer, to get the latest features. And when the updates finally did arrive, they were often riddled with bugs. It's not hard to see why consumers started losing faith. If you bought an LG phone, you had no guarantee that cool features you loved this year would be sticking around for the next. Combine that with the lackluster software support, and it became easier for a lot of people to just go with the safer option like Samsung or Apple. And honestly, who could blame them? It's hard to invest in a brand when it feels like a gamble every year. LG's hardware innovation was undeniably bold, but the problem was that it seemed to never reach its full potential. And a big part of that comes down to mismanagement and poor marketing. For all the time and energy they poured into creating cutting-edge phone designs, it felt like LG didn't know how to market those features to consumers, or even how to keep the momentum going after the phone's launch. Take the LG G5 again, for example. It was marketed as the world's first modular phone, with swappable components like camera grips or high-end audio modules. That should have been huge, right? But instead of leaning into it, LG seemed to second-guess itself. These modules were expensive, clunky, and most importantly, they didn't feel essential. By the next generation, the entire modular concept was dropped, making the G5 look more like a failed experiment than a bold innovation. And then there's the LG Wing, one of the most creative phones they've ever made. But did you see a single commercial or ad campaign that really explained why someone would want a swiveling display? Probably not. It was such a unique phone, but LG barely tried to sell the idea to consumers. Compare that to how Samsung markets the Galaxy Fold. Whether you're interested in foldables or not, you know exactly what it does and why you think you might need one. On top of that, LG never really established a strong brand identity for their smartphones. Samsung was the brand with the best displays and the most features, Apple was the brand with premium design and a seamless ecosystem, and even Sony, who has their own problems with naming conventions, was known as the camera phone. But LG, they were a little bit of everything and a whole lot of not quite sure. There was no clear, consistent message that set them apart from their competitors. Even their budget phones struggled to find an audience. LG had some solid mid-range to low-end options, but with brands like Xiaomi and Motorola offering similar devices at lower prices, LG's lack of aggressive marketing made them feel like an afterthought for so many buyers. While LG was busy innovating and experimenting, their competitors were perfecting and capitalizing. It's almost ironic. Many of the features that LG pioneered were adopted and polished by larger brands, leaving LG behind in the very race they helped start. Take the previously mentioned ultra-wide camera, for example. LG was one of the first brands to introduce it, but then Samsung turned it into a selling point on their Galaxy S series, pairing it with better software optimization and marketing. The same goes for the taller aspect ratios. LG may have led the way, but once Apple and Samsung adopted it, they made it feel like their own. And then there's the ecosystem gap. While LG focused on individual phones with standout features, brands like Apple and Samsung were busy building ecosystems. Apple had the iPhone, iPad, Apple Watch, and the seamless integration across all of them. Samsung also wasn't far behind, creating a robust Galaxy lineup that included smartwatches, earbuds, and more. Another area where LG fell short was timing. They were often first to market with new ideas, but their execution left the door wide open for competitors to swoop in. For example, LG introduced foldable concepts like the LG Rollable, a phone with a screen that rolled out and expanded. Meanwhile, Samsung doubled down on their foldables with the Galaxy Z Fold and Flip, making them leaders in the space. But by 2021, LG's smartphone division was no longer a viable business. After years of declining sales and failed attempts to regain market share, LG made the difficult decision to shut down its smartphone production. It marked the end of an era for a company that had once been a major player in the industry. So, what exactly led to this decision? For starters, LG had been operating their smartphone division at a loss for years. While their flagships like the G3 and V20 had seen some success in the past, their more recent attempts struggled to compete. By the time phones like the LG Velvet and LG Wing came along, consumers had already shifted their loyalty to more established brands like Samsung, Google, Apple, and even newer competitors like OnePlus and Xiaomi. It wasn't just about sales numbers though. LG's strategy to focus on innovation, while appreciated, wasn't enough to keep them afloat. Phones like the Wing and their rollable concepts may have been attention grabbing, but they were niche products that didn't appeal to the mass market. At the same time, their mid-range and budget options just couldn't compete with the pricing and value offered by brands like Xiaomi, Oppo, and Motorola. Internally, it seems like LG also faced challenges in prioritizing their smartphone division. The company has always had a massive business with a wide range of products from home appliances to TVs to industrial solutions. As their smartphone business continued to bleed money, it became harder to justify pouring resources into a division that was dragging down the company's overall profitability. Their departure definitely left a gap in the industry. LG was one of the few brands willing to take big risks and challenge the status quo. With them gone, it felt like the smartphone market became just a little less exciting and experimental. Even though LG phones are no longer being made, their legacy definitely still lives on. Many features that we take granted today, like ultra-wide cameras, taller aspect ratios, and double tap to wake, started with LG, but their influence is undeniable. And who knows? Maybe one day we'll see LG make a comeback in some form or another. After all, the one thing we know about LG is that they're never afraid to think outside the box.